So let's talk a little bit about the function of the turbinates. First, I can say that on the surface of the turbinate there are goblet cells that produce mucus, and that mucus contains antibacterial substances like lactoferrin, IgG antibodies, and lysozyme. And these substances keep the mucosa out of infection and protect the mucosa from wear and tear by a constant breathing that otherwise would dry out the mucosa and damage it. That's one thing. Another thing is that there are some small hairs. I think it's in English called cilia or something, cilla. Those hairs are at the surface of the turbinates, and those do some rhythmical movements that transport particle, viruses, bacteria back to the back part of the nose, where you will swallow it down and it will become neutralized by the stomach acid. Another thing is that on the surface of the turbinates there are several kind of receptors. The receptor I'm talking about here now is the TRPM8 receptor, the thermoreceptor. That's the receptor that is active when you feel a cool sensation, a cool feeling when you inhale through your nose. So, and that's not for nothing. That nerve signal to the brain is really important, and it activates the sympathetic, the parasympathetic nervous system. It activates that and put that one in dominance. So a person who has that part of the nervous system in dominance, he or she is relaxed and feel good. So when these signals are lost, if we remove the turbinates, if we get secondary damage from dryness in the nose, years after that the turbinates are removed, the remaining receptors and the regional receptors would be gone or damaged. So that means that the brain will not get the signal that we are breathing, and that's something that activates the limbic system, and that's the explanation why people with empty nose syndrome feel terribly bad, have high stress levels and can't sleep. So those thermoreceptors, they have a function. They are not just there for fun, and they are connected to your brain and to your nervous system. The turbinates also act to heat, humidify and filter the air before it reaches the lungs. Moist air with high relative humidity is something that is important for a correct gas exchange in the lungs. And the filtration of the particles and bacteria, of course, also protects the lungs from damage and infection. Also, when you exhale through your nose, the air that has been already in your lungs is now moist. It has a lot of water, a high humidity, and when that air reaches the turbinates again on the way out, it is transformed into water again, and the capillaries, the small blood vessels within the turbinate, they reabsorb the water. So this process means that the body saves water while keeping the mucous membrane moist and healthy at the same time. The turbinates via the nasal cycle also regulates the airflow to the body, to the lungs. So hypothalamus is the part in the brain that regulates the nasal cycle and the blood flow to the turbinates based on desired needs. So when we are active, the body needs more oxygen. This is felt by hypothalamus, and a nerve signal is sent to the turbinates to deflate. So this allows more air to pass to the lungs, and the body can get more oxygen. And when the activity is interrupted and we are supposed to calm down, a nerve signal is then sent to the turbinates again from the hypothalamus. These nerve signals tell the turbinates to shrink down, to swell up. This nerve signal tells the turbinates to swell up again, to increase air resistance. And an increased air resistance leads to slower, deeper breathing with fewer breaths per minute, something that leads to a relaxation state. It's also, according to some scientific studies I have researched about, increases the person's cognitive ability. So it increases the function of the brain. And if the turbinates are destroyed, the nose will always become wide open, and this function will be lost. The person then will find it more difficult to relax after being active. So let's talk about another point here. The nasal cycle, I've been talking about that a little bit before. It's a shift between left to right nostril being alternately open or closed. So left nostril opens up, right nostril closes, and it changes from time to time. So the nasal cycle ensures that each nostril rests in respiratory shifts while keeping total air resistance constant for a relaxed breathing. This protects against mucosal dehydration, mucosal damage, and mucosal infection. And during the active part of the nasal cycle, mucus is also secreted more, and that mucus contains antibacterial and antiviral substances. So it's also important for the immune function of the nose. Furthermore, the nasal cycle and the function that one nostril is always a little bit more open than the other is something that improves your sense of smell, because more scent particles can then reach the upper part of the nose where the sense of smell is located. The turbinates also reduce the open volume in the nose, which leads to a compression of the air and acceleration of the airflow. And this is important because high velocity along the nasal mucosa leads to thermoreceptors on the surface of the mucosa being activated, whereupon the individual is given the ability to feel that they are breathing through the nose. If this nerve information is missing, the limbic system in the brain is activated, and the individual is caught in a fight and flight response. And lastly, the turbinates and their shape, they distribute the airflow in the nose so that it spreads evenly over the entire mucous membrane of the nose. This increases the ability to humidify and heat the air, while at the same time it stimulates the nerve endings receptors all over the mucosa in the nose. When the receptors are stimulated, a signal is sent to the brain via the fifth cranial nerve, that tells the brain that we are breathing. The person then experiences a cool sensation in the nose and a pleasant sensation of relaxed breathing. So if the turbinates are removed, the air is not distributed along the entire mucous membrane, but only goes along the nasal floor. And this leads to a reduced ability to feel the airflow in the nose. And that's something that causes distress also among the individuals. And also one more thing, I haven't wrote that here, but the diaphragm is a muscle that under your lungs that contracts your lungs, so it works like it regulates the breathing. It makes you be able to inhale. That muscle also needs a certain air resistance, a certain resistance. So if you remove your turbinates, your breathing will become shallow, rapid. You will not get the natural resistance that you need in the nose. So that's also an important factor about the function of the turbinates. So one thing you should also know about is that the damage you get from no surgery to a turbinates might not come up until several years after the surgery. It's quite common that the problems start mainly like 2, 3, 4, 5 years after the surgery. In my case, I had sleep problems directly after the surgery. And I had dryness, but the dryness wasn't too bad in the beginning. It became worse every year. And that damaged the mucosa more and more every year. Eventually, I had an MRSA infection, I think it was, 4 years after my surgery. And the few remaining receptors, the few remaining thermoreceptors I had in the nose were destroyed during that infection. So I totally lost my air feel in the right nostril, and I also became extremely much drier after that infection. So you can have the surgery, you can feel fine for a few years, and you can have the problems later. And this is because you start with a healthy mucous membrane. And if you remove the turbinates, your nose will become open all the time. You will lose all these secretions with antibacterial substances that will protect the nose from inflammation. The mucus will also protect the mucosa from damage from dryness. So it's likely that when your nose is always open, you will get damage from dryness. And your nasal cycle is also damaged, so this means that one side of the nose can never completely close. So yeah, everything inside there is completely open. It's like leaving the door open to your house. So eventually this will cause some degeneration of the mucosa, and yeah, you can have problems first after a few years. And this is also one reason why the doctors don't really know about this condition. They don't really talk about it because they see the patients like a half year maybe after the surgery, and then never again. So what happens to the patients like 5-10 years later, they have no clue. And if the patients come back to see a doctor, they are not going to draw the conclusion that the problems in the nose is related to the surgery.